Okay, now we're going to look at two things in terms of how sensory input, and in particular food, how the pleasure associated with that, or how we feel about it and how much we want to eat it, can vary as a function of the usefulness and the influence and your affective state. So let's start with the first thing, which is something called alliesthesia. Oh, crap. Okay, never mind. We'll just leave this here. This will make sense in a few minutes. Anyway, sorry. Okay. The hedonic part of a sensation, and we already kind of know this, is the amount of pleasure or displeasure aroused by that stimulus. So whether it's something you taste, you like it or you don't like it. When you taste something, that you're like, oh, that's great, I love that taste, or oh my God, that was awful. Why did you make me eat that, or why did you make me drink that? That's the hedonic part of the sensation. Okay, but it's not fixed. That the amount of pleasure you can get from a sensory input isn't fixed, but can depend on the internal state of an organism, as well as some other factors such as the nature of the stimulus. So, some stimuli, like bitter things, like quinine, things that are very bitter, are going to probably always taste kind of crappy. No matter what, you're always going to find some displeasure with it. You might be able to wiggle a little bit around it, but for the most part, some things just are bad. So there are some stimuli that are innate. You've all lived around Gettysburg long enough to know that we live around a lot of farms. And we get those days when the fertilizer comes running in. I don't know about you, but that pretty much is always, I've lived here over about 30 years. It's still kind of bad. It still does not give me pleasure. So anyway, the nature of the stimulus is involved, as well as the past history of the organism. But let's look at this one, and that is how it's not fixed and how it relates to the internal state of the organism. And this is something that's been termed alliesthesia. And this is the ability of a sensation to move up or down an hedonic axis. So if we think of a hedonic axis as going from extremely displeasurable or unpleasant to neutral, all the way out to really pleasant, really tasty, any given sensation can move along that axis depending upon how useful that organism it is to the organism at that time. So basically, this sort of sums it up. Food is more pleasurable if you're hungry. So if you're hungry, you're going to rate food as more tasty than if you're not hungry. Water is thought of to be more pleasurable if you're thirsty. So if you're out in the desert and you haven't had anything to drink for a while and you're really hot and it's just like, but then you come across an oasis or a visitor center and you go in and get some water. It's like, boy, that tasted good. Boy, I was pretty stupid for not carrying a water bottle with me, right? So the water is way more pleasurable if you're thirsty. Okay, so now we can talk about this. When we're in person, I try to do a demo when we go over this stuff, where I first of all hand out a questionnaire with a bunch of different questions, and two of them are, how hungry are you right now? And there's things like, how thirsty are you? How do you feel right now? And then after you've answered these questions, you have a little bit of, I've always done Fanta orange juice, orange drink, and I don't know why. I think because the study I got this from, that's what they used. So I bring in a bunch of little shot glasses of Fanta orange drink, and I ask them to just drink it and rate how delicious is this drink. Anywhere from 1 being not delicious at all to 11 being very delicious. So, and down here, 1 being I'm not hungry at all, to 11 being I'm very hungry. And although the data points are all over the place, and this was from a few years ago, this is one of the better years where this worked. The correlation coefficient came out to be 0.421, which is not bad. It was significant at the 0.05 level, so it was less than 0.05, so it was significant. But what you can take from this is that when students, were not hungry at all, they rated the Fanta orange drinks down around here. When the more hungry they became, the more likely you were to see ratings up at the higher levels. And even though, like I said, they're scattered all over the place, because this was done in Bowen Auditorium, this was done early in the morning, this was done kind of not very scientifically, but the fact that you saw this trend I thought was pretty good. This is the essence of alliesthesia as proposed by this investigator Michel Cabanac from University of Laval somewhere in Quebec, Canada. And the idea is that things that are more useful to you tend to be rated more pleasurable. You can, for example, have somebody put their hand in warm water, and if you do this after they've been in the cold for a long period of time, they will rate that as high, as more pleasurable than if they've been in a very hot room for a long period of time. So the pleasure that you ascribe to a particular sensation is dependent to some extent on how useful it is to you. Okay, let's go to this other thing. And what about affective state? Can affective state influence how you rate a particular food or how much you're willing to eat? And this is one of the few times I've ever in this class been able to talk about a study published in Personality and Social Psychology Bulletin. But I think one of the et als in this was Kent Barrett, so that was sort of how this got into this. They were kind of also interested in subliminal stimuli. And if you remember, or if you have had social psychology, or if you talked about this in Psych 101, subliminal stimuli are stimuli that enter, that are sensed but not consciously, and can influence behavior, can influence thought, and can lead sometimes, it's thought, to very complex emotions. So what they were interested in this study was whether these subliminal stimuli, which are unconscious, can influence behavior, can they interact with motivation, and is there any conscious awareness? When I was a kid, this was a big thing in movie theaters, subliminal stimuli. What they would do, the movie theaters would, while they were showing the movie, would throw in these very quick, could not be perceived stimuli of like food, popcorn, soda. So they would keep flashing these, and I guess the idea was that it would make you want to go and get more popcorn. You can't do this anymore, but this was a little trick that was done back in the 60s. In any event, the objectives were to see if these subliminal stimuli of different emotions can impact behavior. So subjects come in, they're told a story that they're investigating how biological rhythms influence reaction time, sensations, and mood. So that's all they're told. And they're told they're going to perform a recognition task, they're going to rate their mood, and oh, by the way, we're going to also have you evaluate a beverage. So they present this in a way as if this is really just oh yeah, why don't we do this anyway, since you're here? But this is really what we want to know. We want to know about reaction time, moods, and so on. Okay? So what we're going to do, I'm going to pause for now, and then we're going to come back and talk about that experiment.